Are we there? Can you please check if we are there? You're there. Are we there? Yes. Good morning. Welcome to the online discussion series hosted by the YouTube channel of the School of Commerce, Finance and Accountancy, Christ deemed to be University, Bangalore. I, Rishikesh KB, Assistant Professor at the Department of Commerce, along with my co-host, colleague, rather co-traveler for the course of higher education, Dr. Pranami Sharma, would be hosting and help you navigate through this discussion. And the topic we have chosen for our discussion today is what and why of liberal arts education. Well, a politically conscious, socially responsible, and a well-informed civil society would rarely require an introduction about the speakers who joined us this morning. The celebrated journalist, Ms. Sagarika Ghose, and Professor Dr. Anupam Das. Sagarika is more than a journalist, and Professor Anupam is more than an academic, which I'm sure would be quite evident in the conversations we shall have in the next couple of minutes. I look up to both of you, the speakers, as someone who always vouch and voice for self-respect, citizen rights and responsibilities, and someone who's willing to and is available for debates and discussions like these, in which you speak with so much facts, research, clarity, and conviction. On behalf of the School of Commerce, Finance, and Accountancy, I once again welcome both the speakers and the audience who joined us for this interaction.
Warm greetings to all. I take the pleasure to introduce the first speaker for today, Ms. Sagarika Ghose. She is an Indian journalist, a columnist, and author of renowned books. She has worked in many reputed places like the Times of India, Outlook, the Indian Express. She was a prime time anchor for BBC World on the Question Time India Hour, and she has worked as a deputy editor for CNN IBN Network. Sagarika has won many awards and well known for her biography of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, named as Indira, India's most powerful prime minister. To add on to her success, the journey didn't stop there. She had the most awaited biography of Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, got released this year on the month of January. Awaiting many more for you and for us. I welcome you, ma'am, to the session. Our second speaker for today, Professor Anupam Das. He is an Associate Professor of Humanities and Liberal Arts in Management at Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode. He has been awarded PhD in Linguistics with a minor in Information Science from Indiana University, Bloomington, USA. He has numerous publications in various reputed journals and has been awarded by the renowned institutions for researchers like Household Doctoral Research Grants, Indiana University, discipline-based scholarship in education from Spencer Foundation, to name a few. Anupam Das has been the resource person for seminars and has held talks globally and made all Indians proud immensely. I welcome you both and looking forward to hear from you both.
Thank you.
Both the audience and the speakers for this morning deserve respect and appreciation, because all of us are here to listen to each other, ask, seek, and clarify, which unfortunately is reducing, especially in the leadership and the followership of our times. Had we evolved as liberal societies willing to listen to, and respect each other, the ongoing war wouldn't have erupted between two neighboring countries. Our farmers wouldn't have had to protest for their rights, nor would have our religious identity invited the recent closure of few academic institutions in our state, following the intolerance we got to witness even in the academic institutions. Or because we still remain, probably that's another way of looking at it, we still remain as a liberal society is why we enjoy those rights to dissent and protest. Because being a liberal, I believe, is all about openness and willingness to listen to and learn from each other. And it is also about embracing and celebrating each other's differences. It's about cross-pollination of ideas and philosophies through which we all seek and churn out clarity, and have to create a space to speak the truth with sort of confidence and with conviction. So as always, we request the speakers and our audience to kindly abide by the basic ground rules of our online discussion, so as to avoid cacophony or symphony of ringtones or any other distractions. It's a request to cooperate with our basic discipline throughout this discussion. And the template for our discussion is to initially listen to both the speakers for about their idea of being a liberal. And then a lion's share of this interaction would be dedicated for the question and answer session thereafter. Many have already shared their questions, and the rest can be typed in the chat window or can be asked during the course of our discussion in the YouTube chat window. I now invite Ms. Sagarika to take over from here and give us a little perspective about what makes you a liberal, or probably explain to us your interpretation or your definition of being a liberal by giving us a context, also cross-connecting the various developments of our times. Or to put it differently, what made you write this book, which qualifies you more than anyone to be the speaker of this interaction, Why I'm a Liberal? A book which you've dedicated to all the Indians who believe in individual freedom, and a book about which Gopal Krishna Gandhi had commented, and I quote, I read, "Heed the founders of our republic. History fills every pore of this book. Faith lifts its pages to the destiny of India's liberal soul." I think it's a great testimony to the liberal identity that I wish India should be known for. Over to you, Ms. Sagarika.
Thank you so much for inviting me for this talk. I'm very pleased to be here and to talk to you about this. I was actually very happy that a School of Finance and Accounting and Commerce is exploring liberal ideas, and so it gives me great pleasure to be here with you. I just had a small format question. How long should I speak for? Because that wasn't indicated in the mail. Should I speak for?
So probably initially the 10 minutes is allotted for both the speakers.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. So I'll begin. So your topic is why and what of liberal arts, and the importance of a liberal education, and also the importance of the liberal identity. Now, the word liberal, as you know, comes from the word liberalis, the Latin word liberalis, which means free. And the study of the liberal arts grew out of the ancient Greek inclination to study the values and the pursuit of those disciplines which promote good citizenship, which promote an understanding of society and a knowledge by which citizens can argue their case in court, can serve on juries, can hold the ruling regime to account. For the ancient Greeks, for Aristotle and for Plato, the liberalis pursuit, or the pursuit of free inquiry, was about discharging the noble duties of citizenship in the city-state. And then, of course, the ideas of liberal values and liberal thought got a great sort of impetus and was highly became the obsession, in fact, of the 18th century European Enlightenment, when the ideas of reason, scientific inquiry, a pursuit of the liberal doctrines of reason and analysis were all very much in vogue, and became the sort of governing ideas of education from that time onwards. And then, of course, you had the American War of Independence, which again gave rise to the ideas of the free citizen against the monarch. And of course, the seminal moment of liberal assertion and liberal values was the French Revolution of 1789, liberté, égalité, fraternité, the rights of the free individual or the free human being against an overarching controlling regime, against the monarchy, against the empire, against the state. The idea of the individual pursuing his life, the good inquiry, free inquiry, as well as asserting his sovereignty, the individual asserting her sovereignty against an all-powerful monarchy or state or empire. So this was broadly the development of the ideas of liberalism that took place in the West, and certainly liberalism does arise from very Western notions of individualism and struggle against orthodoxy and struggle against stultifying regime control. But I argue in my book that the reason why we need to hold the liberal project very close to us is because India was founded in 1947 as a liberal democracy. And you're very right. At this moment in time, the liberal world order seems to be crumbling. We have the war in Ukraine, which has actually challenged the rule-based international order very fundamentally. And the questions that we thought had been taken for granted, that is, liberal democracy has triumphed. This is the world of liberal values, open markets, free inquiry, individual freedom, that this was all taken for granted. I think all of these truths, that liberal democracy was here to stay, that liberal democracy had no challenge, these ideas are now open to question. Francis Fukuyama wrote his famous book, as you know, called The End of History, saying basically the challenge to liberal democracy is over, liberalism and liberal democracy is here to stay. Now that essay, The End of History, increasingly looks like a museum piece, because clearly liberal democracy is not universally acceptable. So coming to India, we in 1947 founded our nation along the principles of liberal democracy. And many of these ideas drew from the ideas of the Western Enlightenment and from the ideas of the French Revolution, the American Revolution. The founding fathers of India were unique creations of East and West, and they melded within themselves the ideas of subcontinental individualism and pursuit of liberty, as well as Western notions of liberty, and crafted this incredibly liberal constitution, which we have, which is based on the rights of the individual and the freedom of the individual and the dignity of the individual against overarching state power. Now, I think that when we pursue the liberal arts and when we read the works of history and sociology and politics, we also learn how to become good citizens. We learn how to discharge the duties of citizenship. The duties of citizenship are an understanding of what democratic citizenship, first of all, what it means. We have a duty to understand what it means. We have a duty to also understand what kind of ruling arrangement is presiding over us, to whom are we paying our taxes. We have a duty to understand our legal rights, our legal freedoms, and also the legal rights and legal freedoms of the state. We need to understand how the rule of law is being maintained or not maintained. We need to understand how the rights of minorities, or the rights of the oppressed and the dispossessed are being maintained or not. The free thinking citizen or the free thinking individual is the center of liberal democracy. Is the enabler of liberal democracy, is the catalyst of liberal democracy. If this thinking free citizen ceases to think or ceases to pursue freedom of thought or ceases to understand the duties of citizenship, then the entire liberal democratic project collapses. We have to take seriously the duties of citizenship, the privileges of citizenship, and make possible the functioning of liberal democracy. This is what a study of the liberal arts actually teaches us. The ancient Greeks saw the study of liberal arts as a study in citizenship. And the same way, I believe a study of the liberal arts now is a study of also of not just the discipline in itself, but also the knowledge that empowers us to become democratic citizens. Now, while there is a whole Western canon of liberal thought, I in my book was trying to also establish that there is an Indian liberal thought, and I call the founder of Indian liberalism. He's not just the founder of modern India, but also I call him the father of Indian liberalism, which is Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was deeply liberal. Now, why do I call Gandhi the prophet of Indian liberalism? Gandhi believed ultimately in the freedom of the individual and the empowered individual to act in a way that would make change possible. Gandhi's belief was in the sovereignty of the individual. Satyagraha, or the struggle for truth, was to be engaged in by self-aware, disciplined people who were engaged in a process of self-transformation, which would lead to political transformation. So truth, vegetarianism, celibacy, hygiene, good manners, courtesy, and of course, nonviolence. These were the personal attributes that Gandhi insisted on for those individuals who take upon themselves the responsibility to break the law. Now, satyagraha is not anarchism. It's not breaking the law for the sake of, plunging society into anarchy. But it is moral individuals who answer to a higher call, who answer to a higher calling of justice and truth. Only to them accrues the right to break the law. Because if you are loyal to that higher cause, you are loyal to the higher cause of nonviolence, to justice, to truth, you then break the law in the pursuit of political change. I'm collapsing a lot of ideas here because time is short, and I want to get all of these all of these liberal, I believe, inheritances of India out to you. So our conception of ourselves, the conception of the Constitution, the Gandhian notion of satyagraha is centered on the individual and centered on individual freedom. Now, what I have traced in my book is through the decades, actually, of post-independence India, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whichever the complexion of the political party, the Indian state, which in my opinion is the colonial state, because it is armored with a battery of colonial laws that continue to oppress the citizen. And over time, the Indian state has chipped away at this precious freedom for the individual and freedom for the citizen that the constitution makers enshrined in the 1947 document. If you look at the bans, the restrictions, the taking over of control, has been accumulating over time, so that today we are in a situation where the right to eat, the right to drink, the right to love, the right to marry, the right to read, the right to write, the right to watch the movies you want, the right to write the movies you want, or read the books you want, or write the books you want, all of these are under jeopardy, are jeopardized. You may not fall in love with who you want to, but if there's a vigilante mob outside your door, preventing you. You may not write what you want to if there's a vigilante mob out there burning your books. You may not watch the films you may want to because there's a vigilante mob out there burning down the theater. You can't teach what you want to because of mobs who are interested in controlling curriculum. You can't, as a journalist, and I've seen this up close and personal, the havoc that has been wreaked by the sort of mixing of state power with partisan vigilante bodies. Now, what has happened over time, therefore, is that the Indian state has become an instrument of partisan control. The Indian state, rather than being a neutral and disinterested system of governance, has actually become an instrument of political partisanship. And this is what Gandhi repeatedly cautioned against, that, when state power is used in a partisan way, when state power is used to play partisan politics, then the individual is helpless because you have this immense power of the colonial state yoked to political considerations and yoked to the stamping out of individual freedom. So over time, the Indian state has abused individual freedom to such an extent that we have a situation today where, if you think about it, and if you really think about it, yes, India is independent, and yes, India is free, but are we free? Are you independent? Are you the citizen independent? Are you the citizen free? Are you the citizen truly enjoying the rights that the Constitution has given you? I think the answer to that is probably no. And this is where, again, the study of liberal education comes in, because when you study works of history, you study works of politics, you study the sociological explorations, you will see the extent to which state control is practiced, how it's practiced, and how individuals have operated in particular state systems. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about what's happening to liberal democracy, and because I think that's very important, and I think it's something that we should all worry about. In the 1930s, it was said that the enemy of democracy was communism. In the 1940s, it was said that the enemy of democracy was fascism. Well, today, in the 21st century, it seems that the enemy of democracy is democracy, because it is through the democratic process that you are getting leaders, and these have been called, the leaders who are the elected autocrats or the democratic authoritarians. They have been elected by the people. They have been elected through the democratic process, but they are turning their back on democracy by abusing every single institution of democracy. Rule of law, parliament, judiciary, freedom of the press, the cabinet system, respect for the opposition. All of this is now deeply under question because of democratically elected leaders who are turning their backs on the democratic process. Now, electoral autocracy is also encouraged by the mass media. Today, we have mass media creating massive personality cults. And when you have personality cults, which are created through mass media and through social media, you have a situation where a democratically elected leader becomes so larger than life and becomes so much in control of the media narrative. And if you control the media narrative, you then control the public narrative, becomes so much in control that questioning such a powerful personality becomes very difficult, and dissent to this powerful political machine becomes very difficult. So the liberal values which we hold dear, the values of dissent, the values of freedom, the values of individual citizenship, all of these come under question because of the cult of the media-driven political supremo and the processes of electoral autocracy. So we need to be very, very worried about electoral autocracy, about the abuse of freedoms by the state. Now, I'll just talk very briefly about the two politicians I've written about who actually uphold this trend. Indira Gandhi was in many ways India's first personality cult. She was someone who, again, as you know, came through the democratic process with gigantic mandates, turned her back on democracy, and did terrible damage to India's democratic institutions when she declared the emergency and suborned the democratic system to her own personality cult. That, I believe, has been taken forward by today's regime, which is highly authoritarian, which is an electoral autocracy, and in which the freedom for the individual is diminishing every day. Democratic freedoms simply do not seem to be available, not only not available for civil society, but the media has been completely cowed and bullied, and now is lying prostrate at the feet of the political executive. So, this is the damage that Indira Gandhi did, which I think today's regime under Mr. Narendra Modi has taken to its zenith, actually, the growing cult of political authoritarianism, which is there in our society and which is there in every political party, if you look at it. I think with Mr. Vajpayee, I realized that there was, again, if we explore the life there, you will see that there was a time in India, the 1950s and 1960s, when debate was essential to governance, when parliamentary debates were at their highest, when the Nehruvian parliamentary democracy actually made possible the emergence of Nehru's greatest opponents. And so you had debate, you had Vaad Vivad Samvad, you had people of diverse ideological backgrounds who were able to actually talk to each other and be able to have a conversation. And in the 1950s and 60s in Vajpayee's time, we saw that people moored in ideology, who were strongly rooted in an ideology, could still listen to other people, could still have friendships with other people, could still have dialogue with other people. And this process of dialogue, the process of conversation, the process of talking to each other irrespective of ideology, I think we are losing this largely because of media, largely a lot to do with because of social media. As you know, the social media-driven algorithms are imprisoning people in their own silos in social media universes, so that the art of dialogue is disappearing. So we have these two personalities which reveal to us the growing trends of electoral autocracy. I just want to end with, today we are talking about the Hindutva, the Hindutva revolution, and Hindutva is everywhere. But if we look at the texts of Hindu philosophy, which I had the opportunity to do when I was writing my book on liberal values, every book on Hindu philosophy is about questioning, is about Vaad Vivad Samvad, about argument. In the Bhagavad Gita, God himself has to convince Arjuna to fight a war. He has to convince him by argument and by answering questions and by standing up to interrogation. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Gargi and Yajnavalkya have a question-answer dialogue through which Gargi asks these questions and Yajnavalkya is forced to answer. The word Upanishad is actually to sit near. It means sit near and talk. So a dialogic philosophy, a philosophy based on dialogue, where the seeker seeks alone, without the mediation of any form of orthodoxy. This dialogic philosophical questioning tradition, sadly, is being entirely misinterpreted by the political project that seeks to represent it. And therefore, I feel that not only is the tragedy of individual freedoms a huge one, the tragedy of electoral autocracy is another blot on our civil society. But what is most tragic of all is, I think, what has happened to Hinduism and the way its liberal and its dialogic, interrogating quality is being steadily diminished. So that's what I'd like to say as opening remarks, and I'm very open to questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for your share of thoughts.
Now we would like to listen from Dr. Anupam Das. Maybe would like to listen more about the idea of being a liberal as an academician. What are your arguments and experiences, and the need and importance of being liberal? Or perhaps you can also tell us how one can be a liberal after listening to ma'am. I think that is one of the very important essence that we need to take from the discussion of it. Over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Sagarika, for giving us a broader perspective of liberal ideas and thoughts, the macro view of why we need to have this democratic system, which is liberal in nature, and the benefits of that. And as I've been asked to address this question, and this is the question that often our students ask, that what does it take to be a liberal? What is the process of being liberal? I think there are two very fundamental elements that we need to look at. One of them is home, and the second is the academic institutions where our minds in the formative days are shaped. Now, the past Republic Day celebration, our 8-year-old was asked by her mother to write an essay on Republic Day. And she said, what should I write? She said, I can't tell you. And her mother, being an English literature graduate student, she said, it is up to you. You need to really think, what it means to be in a function in Republic Day. So she wrote something what her friends do in the celebrations, and then she came up with a narrative which can very well fit into the celebration of Independence Day. Flag hosting, we clap, we sing our national anthem, we stand and we help each other. Then we asked her, so what is the difference between Republic Day and Independence Day? Of course, it was a tough question for an 8-year-old. I think it's a tough question for many of us. Possibly we don't know the difference between, because these celebrations have become rituals for us without knowing what we celebrated, right? What it means to be part of a republic, right? So then we explained her that, we have a constitution. She said, what is a constitution? She said that the constitution laid down rules for every citizen, what to follow and what not to follow. Then she asked that question, does that mean I have certain rights as an 8-year? The answer is yes, of course she has rights. She said, then why do you stop me from doing a lot of things that I want to do? Tough question for us. We said, you're a minor, so there are certain things that you probably would not be very efficient in doing that. He said, how do you know if I don't try it out? I said, okay, fair enough. But what are the things that I can let my 8-year-old to try out? Are there boundaries? I said, yes, there are boundaries. That is how the Constitution also draws a boundary. Then I narrated her a story that there was a man, I think it was in London, who was on his way to morning walk, and he was swinging his stick. And then there was another person coming from the opposite direction. And it so happened that the stick touched the other person's nose. The person who was hurt, he took the other person to the court. And in the court, the person who was swinging in the stick, he said, my lord, don't you think that I have the freedom to do that? The Lord said, yes, of course you do. But your freedom stops when the other person's nose begins. Right? So, how do we really inculcate these values, liberal values at home, when we don't forget about kids, even the grown-ups do not have rights to marry someone? Why blame government? Right? Honor killing is still very prevalent in our societies. Right? What to wear and what not to wear. There are cultural norms, of course. Beyond cultural norms also, people will dictate to you that these are certain things that you cannot wear. Right? Does that mean that, society is really putting barriers and bringing constraint? I think we need to understand this particular perspective, right? What it means to be a liberal first at home. Right? Do we allow people to question, particularly kids, to question their parents? If we are an authoritarian parents, probably we are not raising kids whom we could expect to be also liberal, because they also inculcate these values when they become parents. Because we have set the benchmark, these are the roles, duties of parents. We need to stop that. If we don't do that, what happens? So what it means is that, do we create an environment at home where people can agree to disagree and continue the debate? What Sagarika pointed out, that the scope of debate and dissent must be present at home. If that does not happen, that is not there, no matter how intelligent you are, intelligent means in terms of your IQ, right? You may not be able to have that critical thinking. So what is critical thinking? Critical thinking does not mean if I follow someone, I have to blindly follow, including God and goddesses. Right? I can be a non-believer, but I will protect your right to believe in something. Right? So those are things that probably create the foundation, to be liberal. Now, going to schools and colleges, how do we create this atmosphere where students are free to ask questions, challenging questions? In fact, often I ask my students, when you ask really tough questions, that is when I know that you are learning. But if we expect the students to only answer what we ask and don't ask questions, the critical thinking is missing. Because the moment they start asking questions, I know it is not, they're not challenging the teacher per se. They're challenging the previous knowledge or previous stand. That I knew something and there is a person in front of me who is stating something else, and there is a mismatch, misalignment between what I knew and what is being taught to me. Question must come, right? And sometimes we discard them, saying that, well, these are all bullshit questions. No question is bullshit. First of all, let me tell you, if a question is genuinely asked, we must address that. I think one problem that we often see, that if some questions or thought process are not aligned with us, we ridicule them, right? We dump them. And that is where I think some of us who claim to be liberal are being rejected, right? On one hand, we tend to claim that we need to be inclusive. So when you talk about diversity, it is not diversity of only gender, sex, or sexual orientation. For me, when you talk about diversity, it's diversity of thoughts. How do we inculcate that values where divergent thoughts or conflicting ideas can coexist? Can your best friend be someone who follows a leader whose ideology you don't follow, but you can still be friends, right? And in fact, that is what Sagarika was pointing out, in Atalji's era, right? There was this time, this culture of reaching out to people who might have different views, different ideas, different ideological orientation. Yet we can have that kind of discourse, right? Because that is when we evolve. Like the weight, why should we, just imagine if I'm in South India and only food that is available is, say, sambar and dosha. I would probably die, literally, because that does not give me that holistic food that I need. We need to have, because each individual would also have different needs in terms of protein intakes and all those things. It's not same as the other person. So similarly, food for thoughts must be also diversified. Where do we get that? What I say, that activity of five senses. When you don't play with colors, and I'm not talking about Holi here, be like a kid and play with colors. But only think what happens even then, when parents send their kids early on to a coaching school or to art tutor, you really destroy their imagination. Because this formal way of learning everything is not the only way to learn. There's an unstructured way of learning things. The combination of structured and unstructured learning could help you evolve. You need structured learning, you need school. But what kind of school? Right? The ambience, because if I had a teacher whom I'm afraid of to even knock at the door, we close the door, right? So I think to be a teacher, one needs to be very approachable. One needs to be sensitive to different kind of ideas and thoughts, including the conflicting and divergent areas. And that is when you'd have ideas. Sometimes in that process, you get transformed too as a teacher. And this is what I call teaching is a very rewarding experience, because there are times when my students have taught me something, right? And it's not that teaching is always top to bottom, right? It could be bottom to top, because there is a teacher in each one of us. We teach, knowingly or unknowingly. At least we learn. The question is that, we need to be also able to learn from the other person. Right? So this whole idea of liberal space, should be created both at home as well as in academic institution, if we really want to see not only leaders who would be democratic and liberal in nature, but the citizens who would ensure that my leaders are also democratic in nature, right? That throughout the history that has happened. All those revolutions that took place, that is where even the so-called not so-called, the ordinary citizen who do not have as much power as the leaders have, when they come together collectively, they can bring a huge change and revolution, right? And that happens. See, revolution always takes place when younger population come. Most likely, the people like us would have a lot of hesitation to take part. We have families to support. And as we age, we also become little, little vulnerable, right? We don't have that daring attitude, which, at the age of 20, 21, people could do, right? So I think, this entire process of taking it to the next level begins at home. Charity must begin at home, how to raise this or create this atmosphere of liberal ideas. Thoughts, where we could protect each other's ideas and thoughts and discuss, and we must agree to disagree. So that's all I thought I would share at this point, and then we could take it forward probably from here.
Great points, Anupam sir. So it actually reminds me while I was attending Professor Devashish sir, the director of Kozhikode, his one of his session in which he said, his entire thrust was on the importance of questioning. And he said, it's not in the length of the answer, but in the depth of the questions that matters in a classroom. So I think you brought in perspectives about how families should be democratic and how classrooms should also be democratic and inclusive to ideas. So probably unlike applied and specialized fields, the liberal arts education, I understand, is a program that provides students with interdisciplinary education. And I think it combines numerous subjects like the study of arts, social sciences, commerce, humanities. And therefore, the primary objective, I understand, of this course is to enable learning how to think and communicate. And more importantly, learning to ask the right questions, just as Anupam sir was trying to illustrate. So probably my next question is, just to take this conversation forward, extending what Anupam sir had mentioned, how and why should we ask questions? Why should we engage in recent dissent and informed debates? And how would liberal arts education help us build such capacities or such capabilities that would empower the holistic development of probably the both the brain hemispheres? That's a question to Sagarika ma'am, and if there are observations, I think Anupam sir can also respond to that. Over to you, ma'am.
So I think these are very fascinating points that Anupam has brought out. And I think, I would say that when we look at the word liberal, when we look at the word liberal education, we need to focus on that, the first part of that word, liberal, liberty, the famous statue in America, Statue of Liberty. Liberty. Liberty is the freedom to question and the freedom to challenge and the freedom to introspect and the freedom to enjoy your own freedoms. Now, in my book, I tried to ask this question and communicate this question. How important is your individual freedom to you? Do you believe in individual freedom? Do you believe you should have the right to ask questions? Do you believe you should have the right to eat what you want or read what you want or wear what you want or speak what you want or watch the kind of movies you want to or write the kind of books you want to? As Anupam rightly pointed out, my liberty begins where yours ends, which is why the Liberal Project is located primarily on the rule of law. Because without the rule of law, there cannot be a liberal democracy, because we are not then free to pursue our liberal freedoms. But the ability to question has to come from within. You know, as I said, the Bhagavad Gita, what is the Bhagavad Gita? It's questions. It's a man, a warrior on the field asking God, why should I fight? Why should I go out there and kill my relatives? Why should I prosecute this war in which I go out there and I have to put to death people who I have revered all my life? Bhishma Pitamaha is my family guru. And you're telling me that I have to go and put him to death. Why should I do this? What is the reason why I should do this? And these are the questions that the warrior asks God, and God answers, you know, in terms of duty and karma yogi and your duty as a warrior. But again, the Bhagavad Gita keeps questioning, and that is the great lesson of the book, of the text, is that the capacity to keep questioning. The book ends with a question. There's no answer. It's a question. So in that sense, we as teachers, when you communicate to your students, or as a journalist, when I communicate to my readers, what I want to communicate is, please inculcate the virtues of skepticism, or a certain skepticism towards authority. Now, as Anupam rightly said, this is not there in our families. Our families are hierarchical, reverential, authoritarian, and they do not promote questioning in the liberal spirit. But I would say that, as if we want to make liberal democracy possible, it is our duty to understand what we have to do as citizens. Without the citizen, liberal democracy is not possible. We won't have democracy if we don't make it possible ourselves. So all of us, and I've said this in my book, we need to study the Constitution. We need to study the rules by which our country has been made into a nation, and we need to understand why these are important, because these values are more in jeopardy now than ever before. We're losing the ability to question. We're losing the ability to interrogate. We're losing the ability to question shibboleths of religion, caste, gender, all of this. And I think that we can understand the need for this if, first of all, we acquaint ourselves with the Indian Constitution and understand what our liberal democracy needs us to do. Now, I'll give you an example. You may have followed the hijab controversy that took place in Karnataka, over girls, whether they should wear the hijab or not. Now, this is an interesting dilemma for the liberal. You see, should women have the right to wear a certain kind of dress when they attend a classroom? As a liberal, I would say, absolutely. You see, we should not get trapped in the war of symbols. So-and-so is wearing this, and so-and-so is wearing that, and so-and-so is wearing a hijab, and so-and-so is wearing a saffron scarf, and there is a kind of clash of symbols. Now, to me, the symbols are not important. What's important is whether the individual is making a free choice. If the individual woman is making a free choice to wear whatever she wants to the class, then she must have that choice. Now, then there is the question of the rights of the institution. Does the institution have the right to have rules? If the institution has a dress code or a uniform, should the individual who is studying in that institution not follow the institution's dress code or uniform? Now, that is also a question that we have to wrestle with. You see, from my point of view, I don't think colleges should have dress codes. Universities should not have dress codes. Schools, yes, they should have dress codes. But I believe when it's a question of individual choice and institutional choice, when there's a choice of, when there's the freedom of the institution and freedom of the individual, we must at that point have dialogue. We have to have negotiation. We have to have the achievement of the golden mean. And by the golden mean, I mean the freedom of the institution, the freedom of the individual will have to be balanced. I used to study in a convent school, and I remember in my class, there was a diverse grouping. There would be people in turbans, there would be people with tilaks, there would be people with the kara, there was a senior girl in my class who would come in with a Mangal Sutra. This was in the higher classes. So there is the concept of the diverse classroom, and the classroom being a monument to diversity, and the classroom being a place where identities are negotiated and and become a part of dialogue. What I think the liberal needs to resist is any form of imposition by a vigilante squad or imposition by the state. Now, if an institution has its own rules and it has the right to have its own rules, in that case, there needs to be negotiation and dialogue between the institution and the individual. So either way, none of this can be sorted out through street power or violence or battles on the street or pitched battle or by the state using state power for partisan means. So the state, you see, we have to understand, we have to understand what individual freedom is and why it's up against state power and why it's up against partisan use of state power. Now, when we want to be free individuals, when we want to pursue freedom of choice, we have to also be free to ask questions of those who rule us, right? Those who rule us can't make arbitrary rules. As Anupam said, you'd feel terrible about eating only dosa and sambar in the south. Well, what if the state came up with a rule that only vegetarian food will be served in this particular state? Now, the state can't do that because our rights are protected. Our rights as non-vegetarians are protected by law. So again, we need to understand where our rights are protected and where we need to dialogue with institutions. So I think that as liberal democratic citizens living under the umbrella of the 1947 Constitution, we have to first familiarize ourselves with the Constitution and understand the rules that have been laid down for modern democratic citizens of 21st century India. Once we know the structure in which we are operating, we will know our rights, we will know the state's rights, and we will know when we need to dialogue. And we will see how the liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship is enshrined in the preamble of our Constitution. And so many people don't know this. Students don't know this. Liberty of belief, faith, expression, thought, worship. These are enshrined in our preamble. You have liberty of thought. You have liberty of expression. You have liberty of worship. You have liberty of faith. You have all these liberties that are given to you in the Constitution and enforced by the rule of law. So once you know that, I think as students and as citizens, we must always live up to that and keep, taking advantage of this liberty that has been given to us.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. So problem is sometimes we don't even know what our fundamental rights are. And
Yeah,
when
we don't know.
and
So
this
we should all
ignorance is
read
not
the
being
Constitution. You know, we
Right.
all must read the Constitution of India.
Exactly.
I keep saying this to, I wish teachers would teach the Constitution of India to students.
Yeah,
You know,
at school level. At
School level.
yeah. So, because that is when you would be aware. And this is what would probably, to a certain extent, I would not say guarantee, but promote this questioning ability that this is my fundamental right.
yes,
And I need to, right?
in the
And
preamble, liberty
yeah.
of thought, belief, expression, faith, worship. It's
Right.
there in the preamble. So, I mean, this is something that we are, you know, when we, and the other reason to read the Constitution is also to understand the rule of law. You know, unfortunately, we, instead of rule of law, today we have rule by law. You know, we have oppressive instruments like sedition and, these kind of laws which are slammed on students. Now, I believe that students must have the right to think wrong thoughts.
Right.
Look, it's how you must have the freedom to make mistakes, because it's only by making mistakes that you learn. The campus should be a monument to freedom. I mean, where you can say all kinds of wrong things. You can shout all kinds of wrong slogans. You can say whatever you want, because that's how you learn. Right?
But then they must be also given that confidence that even if I say
you won't be put in jail.
you'll be
You won't be put in
protected.
jail.
Yes, yeah. If I don't have that sense of protection,
Yes, you don't have it.
Yeah, so I would hesitate.
That's because of the state. You see, the state has become partisan because the state structure over time has been taken over so completely by political parties. And I'm not saying political parties of any color. All political parties are guilty of this.
Right.
You know, in every state, whether it's Bengal or Delhi or Kerala, or wherever, all political parties are guilty of taking over the state structure and using the state as a partisan instrument to destroy individual freedom by imprisoning you, by jailing you, if you say things that the powers that be don't like. But the fact is, students have to say things that people don't like. You know, I only have freedom of speech because I have freedom to offend.
Right.
Freedom of speech without freedom to offend means nothing. And I'm only saying nice things to you, and you and I are exchanging platitudes. But the freedom to offend is what actually constitutes free speech. Now, free speech, of course, is a whole different area of debate, but free speech has to include an element of the right to offend, because without the right to offend, there's no freedom.
Right. So I'll also take it to the other level that Rishikesh has talked about, that interdisciplinary thoughts, right? Where, see, MIT had a very robust liberal arts department and all. Why? And we see that a lot of engineers or computer scientists come to do linguistics. And I'm from linguistic background. And I also, when I went to Indiana, I was drawn towards this social informatics, that what is happening in that field. When these kind of ideas from two different or multiple different disciplines freely exchange their ideas and all those things, we see wonderful creations.
Yes. Right. I mean, absolutely. I mean, the relationship between mathematics and music, for example.
Exactly.
You know, that's something that my tutor at Oxford was a great mathematician. He was a historian and a mathematician and a terrific piano player. Right. And every time we used to go for tutorials, he would play the piano and he would make these compositions, and they were all mathematically annotated. So I think this kind of intellectual and sort of theoretical adventurism can happen if you are multidisciplinary.
Yes, and in fact, that is when we see beautiful creations, beautiful ones, right? And talking about history, the celebrated author, international bestseller, Yuval Noah Harari. Right? He's able to forecast a lot of things, and people are reading his books and all those things. Because why? What happens? Because when you are aware of not just about rights, but also it liberates you from many various different angles, right? You are able to foresee many things. Otherwise, you would have to wait for something bad to happen to take note of it, right? So then it is too late. Can I see something? Yeah, you're talking about symbols. We need to also be aware of certain symbols. That semiotics play a very important role in predicting or forecasting something. That, well, these are the symbols of maybe say fascism, right? If we see that some symbols of fascisms are present here and there, right, we need to be cautious and how to address them.
But you see, we mustn't get trapped in the war of symbols.
Exactly.
That's what I find has happening today. That I'm wearing a hijab, you are wearing a pallu, so I'm better than you because I'm wearing a pallu and you're in a hijab, or I'm wearing a kada and you are wearing a turban. I'm better than you because these are the war of symbols.
Yes.
And for example, Indian women who wear a sari, right? Now a sari is a traditional dress. Now I'm wearing a sari, but does it mean that because I'm wearing a sari, I'm a traditional Indian woman? It doesn't mean that, right? This is a choice I make as an individual to wear a certain form of dress. The dress does not mean it's a symbol of who I am or what I should or how I see myself. It's just a choice.
True, I agree. In fact, to support your point further, see, even this hijab controversy is blown out of proportion. The thing is that they were not disobeying the institutional rules. They were not. I mean, the institutional rules, they were following that on top of that, but at the same time, they also had certain belief system and they're following that, which other people from other religions also are following, because putting a bindi versus, bangles and all
the diverse classroom.
Right.
The diverse classroom.
When we talk about,
the fact is that's important. But, just on symbols, have you read a book called Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco?
No, I'm
afraid Name of the Rose.
Right.
So it's Umberto Eco is a great theorist of semiotics and a great theorist of symbols. And this book, Name of the Rose, it's a fantastic book, and I urge you all to read it. Is that it's about a 13th century Franciscan monastery, and William of Baskerville is a medieval murder investigator. He's a detective, and he comes to this monastery because monks in this monastery are mysteriously dying. Nobody knows why they're dying, but they're being killed. There are monks in this monastery who are being killed, and William of Baskerville, this investigator, comes to this monastery to understand who's killing these monks. Why are they dying? And I'll give it away. This is the spoiler. It's very well written. It's written like a thriller, because it's one monk suddenly falling off his roof, somebody dying in a well, and somebody dying here. Why are all these monks dying? What's happening? This peaceful, beautiful monastery where grass is green and flowers and everything, and suddenly there's all these deaths. It turns out that actually the medieval church was putting these monks to death because they had come upon Aristotle's hidden work, the Comedy, and they were learning how to laugh. They were learning to laugh at the church. They were learning to laugh at beliefs. They were learning to laugh at faith. So that's why they were being put to death. But it's a very interesting parable of how authorities throughout history, he uses, again, all of this is symbolism. It's just a symbol of the book and the symbol of the monks. But how authorities over time have tried to stamp out the ability to, because the ability to laugh actually is about questioning tyranny. Laughter, as I write in my book, laughter kills fear. And without fear, there is no tyranny. So, when you, which is why laughter, the pen is mightier than, the joke is mightier than the sword. Because the laughter can actually be a subversive instrument. Satire and jokes are highly subversive to question authority. So here we have, again, the symbolism of laughter and the symbolism of jokes and the symbolism, which is why I think stand-up comedians today are doing so well. When you look at Veer Das or, whoever these comedians are, they're doing extremely well. So again, questioning of authority, questioning of received wisdom, questioning of orthodoxy in an institution is so very important and can be done in many ways, through dress, through through questioning, and through even laughter, through jokes.
Right, yeah. And also talking about this uniform, right? I think many of us confuse uniform with only identity. It can be part of your identity, but it is actually a lot more, in sometimes, why do you think often in colleges and universities we don't have uniforms? Why it is there in school? Right, because this is a vulnerable section of our population. When we have a uniform, teachers can easily identify this is my student if something happens, right?
Also, it's an egalitarian thing that the rich don't come in rich clothes and the poor are not coming in modest clothes. So it's a kind of egalitarian instrument.
That too, but then for example, in many US schools, even they don't have uniform. They
don't have uniform
because they believe in individual thoughts, the individuality. I need to be. The thing is that you can't really make everyone at the same part. We need to be able to really accept the rich as well as poor as they are. That is also another concept that we need to also explore.
Yes, we do, because that is again a freedom, and that is again the pursuit of diversity, right?
Right.
So now the point is, you see, this hijab control. I mean, my point was that, you see, if a woman is being coerced into wearing the hijab, then as a liberal, I can't support any form of coercion.
Right.
But if it is freedom of choice, and if it is a free choice made by a woman to wear whatever she wants to class, I mean, so long as it doesn't offend, how does any of this offend public order or offend public decency? That's the only rule that we have to look at. If it's offensive to public order, offensive to public dignity, or offensive to decency, none of it is. So if on the other hand, none of these sections are being violated, then how can you stop someone from exercising their free choice and wearing what they want to wear?
The question over here, then, like from the other end, of the spectrum, they say that how do you know that the women who are wearing hijab is also their free choice? Is it not imposed by the dogmatic view of the religious
religious order?
Right. So then it is probably, when in fact, and I've also come across the Muslim students who probably did not want to wear hijab, but was somewhat forced by the context. That if I am the one, in a group of 10 who is not wearing hijab, I'm singled out, and it is a lot of pressure on that person. So
it is a lot of pressure. I mean, the thing is, these are all, issues that have to be sorted out through negotiation. For example, I went to teach a term at the University of California in Berkeley. And I was actually shocked at that time to find the students who had come into, they were literally coming in shorts and sort of sweatshirts and what looked to me almost like their night clothes, and, sort of very, I mean, something that Indian students would never come to class wearing. They were coming in very, the informality of the American classroom was something that took me aback. I'm sure you may have experienced it also. And I realized that actually, why was I reacting this way? Because I had been brought up in a scenario where you dressed up modestly and you went to class, and the girls sat on one side and the boys sat on one side, and and that's how we had classes in college. But of course, that's not the way classes are held in many institutions and many universities across the world, and we need to be open to change. But on this notion of dress code, you see, many colleges in North India, I don't know if you saw that controversy where the Benares Hindu University dean was imposing a dress code. Now, my point with dress code is often they're imposed only on girls. That only girls have to dress in a certain way. Where boys can wear whatever they want. They can wear their shorts and their, sleeveless jackets or whatever. Girls have to come dressed modestly. And, and the BHU vice chancellor even accused the girl students of, marketing your modesty and use words like that. I was there at that time. I covered that particular event. And I thought that was, this selectivity also can't be there.
Yeah.
You see, you can't have free choice for men and no free choice for women. So I think ultimately it does boil down to freedom of choice. It does boil down to a negotiation between, the woman and the authorities, both in her family, her religion, and in her school. If at some point the woman wants to, say, cast off the burqa or cast off the hijab, she should be free to do that. If there is no freedom to do that, then that is also something that I would oppose. Yeah. That if a family or a religious order or a domestic situation forces a woman to dress in a particular way and then does not give her permission to change her way of dress, that is also something as a liberal that I can't, that, we can't.
So it brings down to this again, the same thing, right? From the macro, which is the governance and all those things, we need to have that freedom. We also need to have freedom, but with freedom comes responsibility. With that,
and dialogue,
and dialogue, yeah.
And have
dialogue,
to have dialogue.
Right.
Once we lose the capacity for dialogue, for example, even in the Sabarimala case,
right?
The temple entry of women. Should women be allowed into this particular shrine? Now, as a liberal, I believe in equal citizenship. I believe everybody should be allowed in everywhere. Right. But the fact is that this particular shrine has its own rules and does not permit women of a certain age to join. Now, again, is the answer state diktat that I will make a rule, I'll make a law, and the police power will be used to enforce a choice that has been made by the Supreme Court? See, I don't think that is necessarily the way to go. The Gandhian solution is dialogue.
Yeah, right.
It's dialogue. Because if you use state power, and if you use because I believe the state is a violent instrument, and if you use the violence and coercion of the state to force, to force choices on people, that will have a backlash. I think the way forward is the Gandhian doctrine of persuasion, of dialogue, of winning over individuals. Again, we come down to it. It's the individual. Individual talking to individual. When you and I are talking face to face, we can speak about so many different things. If you and I were strangers arguing on Twitter, we would be arguing about stereotypical images of each other, and we would not be having a dialogue.
Yeah. So therefore, I think, what we need to do is to also remove this segregating ways of functioning, men on one side, women on the other side. Even today, you go to a party, you see that, men and women are talking in different. So negotiation and discussion cannot happen because we really do not understand each other's need, requirement, and world. So, to bring that, if I do not have a friend, close friend from different religious belief system, if I don't have a friend who is maybe 80-year-old and who is also 6-year-old, I would not be able to really, negotiation and discussion, is not a mechanical task. We really need to be able to understand different kinds of psychological facets, and therefore sociological factors and all those things, when you are able to understand that with compassion, not just as a competition, it become competition for many of us, that prove that I'm superior to you, when that is removed, when we have compassion and all those things, and when we understand each other's world to a certain extent, we may not be able to fully understand, because it's for a man to be woman, but then I also don't believe that, men are from certain planet and women are from different planet. We are from the same planet.
No, we're from the same planet.
But the way we operate, it seems like we are from different planets, because rarely you would see, and the places where we have seen that men and women operate in the same psychological social space, you see that more inclusive world where the people even see religion in things. If you see that there are Muslim ghettos, right? For a Muslim to find out rent a house on rent and all those things in Hindu-dominated areas in some places is very difficult. So inclusivity and creating this social space which is inclusive would probably create that process of.
For example, as a teacher, I want to ask you that in a classroom, do you have Muslim students and Hindu students?
Yes, we do.
You do. So, why don't you try an experiment that in a classroom, you try to get the Hindu and the Muslim students to talk to each other just as individuals, and to try and talk to each other, not as, and to try and argue issues, argue the hijab, or argue uniform civil code, or argue, how Muslims are represented in popular culture. There was a school in Meerut which did this, which got a Hindu student and a Muslim student to sit together on the same desk. The class was divided and every desk was with a Hindu and a Muslim and a Hindu and a Muslim and a Hindu, or different religions and a Christian. And each was told to argue and find to take a question, like take the hijab question or take the uniform civil code question, argue it out and come up with 3 points you agree with. Agree on.
In fact, same line. same line, I just recently, in a class that I concluded, there was a very interesting ad by Heineken, the beer brand, and where they brought 5 or 6 different people who have opposing views. So they were recorded, their views are recorded before they were introduced to one another, and they were given a common task, and then they were asked to discuss and negotiate and all those things. So, and after they've completed the task, then they were shown who said what before meeting about particular idea. For example, feminism, or let's say, or capitalism, or environmental decay, and all those things. And then they were asked, they were given a beer, of course, and they were asked, so would you like to, now it's you are free to choose whether you want to stay here or you want to leave there. Everybody stayed back and they made friends, of course. They were promoting beer there. But the process that, in fact, a few of my students pointed out, it's not just the beer. But then because there was a shared space, and that is the task, the assignment that they were given to complete, they were able to get to know each other. And they found that they are as beautiful as their people who have other views and all.
Yes.
And then it brought that is, that beautiful ad ended with these things. So it's, there is no alternative to discussion.
There's no alternative to discussion. For example, if you look at the wars of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and if you look, this is what Gandhi says and what he discovered through discussion. For example, the wars of the Mahabharata and the wars of jihad, they both actually mean the same thing, because how Gandhi spoke about the Mahabharata, it was the war within. It's the war within, the war between one's best self and one's worst self. And so is jihad. It's actually the war within. Yeah. And Gandhi realized that that all the religions of the world actually teach the same principle, that it's a war with the demon and the angel, both of which are inside the human being. And this war for our best selves and the war for our most moral selves can emerge through this dialogue, through this process of battling, through the process of argument.
I'm sure people in the audience might be thinking, if that was the ultimate solution, why did not Russia and Ukraine begin that one, right? But
because it's not within. It has to be within. It has to be within yourself, not outside.
Yes. Sorry, I have to interfere in the interest of time. So in the interest of time, so there are a couple of questions, and I also seek your consent and permission. How much time would you be in a position to, because we have certain questions which are more specific to the topic that we have chosen for our discussion.
Okay.
Another 15 minutes maybe?
I can be here till about 11:30.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Something which is of more specific to the topic that we have chosen is, with the new education policy in place, there are humongous possibilities. Not sure about the liberty of doing it, but about the opportunities to experiment with our curriculum. Because as per the new education policy, the academic institutions can actually offer a sort of mocktail of disciplines, or a pool, or a variety of subjects for the students to choose from. And the NEP drafters have even proposed to establish 5 liberal arts Ivy League level institutions in India within the next 5 years in those states that are kind of willing to provide so much of land, which is more than 2,000 acres. So our next question is, what exactly should be taught in liberal arts education? What should be the offerings be in the curriculum that we design by an academic institution? I think we seek response from both of you.
Sure. I think, even it's at our institute, we have a liberal studies department, humanities and liberal studies, and we combine management theories with the liberal studies. Why? Things like moral science, ethics, right? We need to also there are 5 things in order to really have a holistic development. In addition to IQ, right? We need to have EQ, which even Yuval Harari has pointed out that, the way the world is changing, only with IQ, we probably won't be able to survive, because with AI and NLP and all those things, probably they would take over. And so they make beautiful algorithms, and sometimes they can be very dangerous too. So why we need EQ? Because your EQ, meaning EQ is not equivalent to emotional balance, although it may guarantee, somewhat supportive. EQ is the ability to understand your emotion as well as understand others' emotion, and then accordingly respond to the situation that require your attention. That is one EQ. You also need to have what is called social quotient. How well do you understand your society? Cultural, socio and cultural, when I say social, you need to be able to understand socio-cultural aspects. And one important thing that often we don't talk about, that is called creative quotient. Right? Creativity cannot be taught, right? But an academic space can create environment where students could be encouraged to try out new things. But they would try out new things only when we celebrate failure. We often celebrate only success. We don't celebrate failure, right? So, but if you look at most successful people, the many failures that the steps that they have come up with, all of us have failures in life. It's like failures may not be in other sense, but in a very strict sense, but failure in our own sense, right? So creativity and social quotient and emotional quotient, these are the things that even an engineer, even a person who is dealing with accountancy or finance, say Partha Sarathi Dasgupta, Professor Emeritus in Cambridge, talks about green finance. The kind of problem that we are facing today, sustainability. No one takes environment in the part of the equation when we talk about GDP. What is GDP? GDP, nowhere we talk about sustainability, right? And often we measure development in terms of buildings, in terms of infrastructure and all those things. But what we notice today is that those are the problems. They're not solutions. So what is the solution? In order to understand solutions, you need to be futuristic. And to be futuristic, if you are not creative, if you are only talking about, how to solve A plus B is whole square, and if you know the formula, that would not really take you there, right? You need to know history. Why history? Because history is not only about dates and events. It is about, it has a cognitive aspect that tells you what happened in the past, and if you can connect the dots, of several events that happened in the past, you could probably see what is happening in future. Right? So to be futuristic, you need to also study this history, right? So I would say, whether it is engineering school, or a school of accountancy, finance, or even physical science and all those things, everyone should have liberal studies orientation, right? Because this is where you develop critical thinking. You would have you would try your, and every child is born creative. It's just that as we grow up, we clip their wings and they can't fly, and that is my fear, that to enable them to think freely also requires that creative thoughts and creative quotient. So our curriculum. So that as far as the new NEP is concerned, theoretically it is very, very good, but I have my fear about implementation part. Right? How to implement those complex ideas, and for that, we need to really do a lot of research on education, pedagogy, and all those things, the fundamental research that many of the European and US schools do, and then learn from that, what is the need of today's society, not just the current need, but also the future needs, right? So.
I would say that regarding the NEP, it's a very wonderful vision document, but I, really am partial to the American system of the liberal arts, by which you don't major in a subject right away. When you come into the American university system, you actually have access to 4 or 5 different subjects, and you decide to major only, I think, in the third year, in your final year, when you take your major. So I would say that, the Indian undergraduate system, and comparing it, the American system, to what I went through in St. Stephen's, from day one, you have to choose history or philosophy or, English honors or philosophy honors or history honors. And, at the age of 16, you may not know exactly where your interests lie. So I would say that students coming at the university level should be given a wider smorgasbord, a wider choice of subjects in their first year, because in their first year, you can't know. You can't know that whether I want to be an honors student in history or an honors student in philosophy or an honors student in English. So I would say that even if you're going into an engineering option, or even if you're taking, the medical school, in fact, medical sciences is so interesting. My son is a doctor. And he was saying that in the curriculum in Manipal, they're actually taught, a lot of life skills, a lot of social skills. Like, for example, a big part of a doctor's life is actually how to talk to patients and how to communicate. So it's almost like public speaking. You have to be able to communicate, and this is the age of Google. So your patients are Googling treatments and medicines all the time. So you have to be able to allay fears, allay things. So you need, the art of communication, the art of speaking, all of this. And I think, partial to, as I am to creativity, I think a course in drama, courses in satire, courses that bring the learning process into the arena of lived life. I think that's very important. I think drama is a subject that you can learn so much from.
Yeah.
If you're acting out a part, or you're acting out a particular character, if you're playing, say, Napoleon, or you're playing Richard III, you will learn much more about Napoleon by playing Napoleon than you will by reading about him.
True.
You'll learn much more about Shah Jahan or Akbar or Rana Pratap from instead of books. You learn much more if you actually play the role. So the use of drama in learning, I think, is very important. I also think it's very important to have that choice available before you major. I think, also a combination of courses, like, in Oxford, you have the PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics. You can take a degree in all three subjects in one course.
Yeah.
I think those kind of, why can't we have degrees in a combination of subjects?
Yeah.
Why do we only have history or philosophy or English or, engineering? Why don't we have, say, English and agriculture, or, engineering and drama? I mean, why can't we? I mean, that sounds radical, but I'm just saying, why can't we have a combination of courses in which we can take degrees?
True. In fact, some of these are already here at IMK. We do have those courses. It's a combination of like history of science and engineering, or history of business. We in fact have a business history museum that people.
Right.
But also as far as the drama and films, because I make use
drama,
of
film, and popular culture.
That is, these are courses. But in fact, not just IMK. I'm pretty sure other institute. But yes, we need to catch up with that. More and more institutes should probably embrace those subjects.
And I think rather than having degrees in single subjects, we could have degrees, and it's considered status. It's prestigious that I'm history honors or I'm sociology honors. Why does it just have to be that one subject? Why can't you have? I think there are schools actually. I think Ashoka University in Delhi, and I think the Jindal University in Delhi also is offering a kind of you can become a BA in 3 subjects or 3 or 4 subjects. A combination of subjects. Yeah, I think that makes sense rather than just at the age of 16 having to decide whether I want to fully plunge into only the study of history or only the study of English. That's what I had to do. I had to do history honors. I loved history. I mean, I loved doing history. But there were many people who were floundering, who didn't like it, who chose it, but they got the marks, so they took the subject. But I just think that at the university entrance level, there should be many more choices available.
True.
Okay, so one of the last questions which I wish to ask ma'am is with respect to image management. which I believe is a core domain for your, the kind of works on authorship you had. So given the context of development of your times, are the liberals facing any sort of image crisis or identity crisis? Are the liberals relevant in these times, or do you think they're confused? Is that confused state is leading, or the clarity is required, or that can be done with the pursuing of liberal education? Do you think it can help?
That's a very interesting question. I'm so glad you asked this. When I wrote my biography of Vajpayee, everybody asked me that why are you, who has written Why I'm a Liberal, writing on Vajpayee, who is, from the Hindu nationalist stream of thought. How are you managing this? And I think that that's what liberals should do. Actually, the liberal project is about understanding another point of view. And I think what's happened to India's liberals and what's happened to liberals worldwide, when Hillary Clinton very disparagingly called Donald Trump's supporters, they are a basket of deplorables. They're just deplorable people. Let's not even think about that. Well, the deplorables won the election, and you were defeated and the deplorables won, and that was the end of that. So the fact is that, this liberal elitism and liberal intolerance and liberal judgmentalism, I think, is the reason why liberals have painted themselves into a corner. And I think, to rescue the liberal project, we're going to have to understand, again, go back to the meaning of the word liberalism, which is, in Hindi, udarvadi, open, plural. You need to understand the other point of view, and you need to engage with the other point of view, and talk to the other point of view. Now, Vajpayee did that. He was rooted in his Hindu nationalist ideology, but his best friend was Hirendranath Mukherjee of the CPI, Bhupesh Gupta of the Communist Party, and he kept reaching out across the aisle and talking to people who he didn't agree with. So you can hold to an ideology and still listen. Yeah. You can believe in something and still reach out to other people. You can have friendship, you can have sympathy, you can have empathy, you can have even love, but you may not have 100% agreement. That is a liberal premise. And I think that we've run away, we've really abandoned that. And when I wrote the book, I faced flack from left and right. Right was telling me, what does she know about Vajpayee? Left was saying, how dare she write about Vajpayee? She has sold out. But the thing is that a biography is not a hagiography. So you can write about someone and look at their shortcomings and their virtues as well as their failings. And at the same time, I think the effort to understand and the effort to reach out has to be there. As you were saying, we really need to dialogue and we need to reach out and understand the other. I keep saying, don't spend all your days arguing with people on Twitter, arguing with strangers on Twitter. Get out there and talk to people, move your body physically to people, to other bodies, to other physical people, and talk to them face to face. I think that's how, through conversation and negotiation, we can understand each other. And I think that's what liberals are failing to do. We've I think liberals again became too enamored of state power. A number of very highly acclaimed academics in Bengal, actually, who I know, became so closely associated with the ruling CPM at that time in Bengal that they became indistinguishable from the government. And so if you become a part of the state, you become a part of the government, you lose that independence and you lose that openness. So I think that openness and pluralism is something that liberals have lost. There's a crisis of identity for liberals. India's lost liberals, as I call them. So they are lost. They're searching for an identity. And I think that, but I think the answer lies in Gandhi. The answer lies in dialogue, persuade, go to people, talk to people. That's the only way.
Yeah,
that's the only way.
I teach a course called Communication as Impression Management, and where I distinguish between impression management and impression manipulation. So impression manipulation is something you cannot sustain. impression management is not a bad thing. You need to know how to manage resources effectively so that you sustainability is core of management. And in that, in fact, I often screen that film, Satyajit Ray's Nayak, when Uttam Kumar became the hero, and when Sharmila Tagore was interviewing him, and so she brought, she tried to bring his past through this, as a investigative journalist, for pretty much, so what would he have done? And so she brought his vulnerable side. And also as a celebrity, he also created a kind of a cult image, which he didn't want to really reveal. His past, he didn't want to reveal. So those kind of issues would always be there. But I think true liberals, as you said, probably would not lose the ability to ask difficult questions, no matter who is in power, right? Or who is the authority. And of course, we do have to worry about probably, certain times, how they would respond to those things. But just often you would notice that, maybe the fear is internal, right? Once we gather that courage and ask questions, yes, there could be some repercussion, but it won't be that as bad as we might have assumed to be. Right. And when we stop asking that question, each one of us is in danger.
Just to this image management point, as I always say, I always wear a sari. I always say that even though I'm a liberal and I'm speaking in English and I'm talking to you about these ideas of freedom and all of that, look, I'm wearing a sari. And so if it's a question of image, this is an Indian woman rooted in India in my sari talking about liberal values. So this is my project to Indianize and to own, in a way, to own liberal values.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, both the speakers. Being the topic specific to liberal arts education, I think that the inflexible current course structures that our undergraduate colleges offer, and the kind of obsession to specialize at that level of education has probably undermined the aspirations of many of our young people in pursuing what we call a liberal education. But with, I think, several institutions like APJ Satya University, OP Jindal, Foundation of Liberal, which is otherwise known as FLAME Institution, Ashoka University, and even Christ deemed to be University Bangalore, which we represent.
I think also the Azim Premji School.
Sorry, I think I missed out that. Yeah. I think Indian students are currently getting a chance to get an exposure about liberal arts education at home itself. But I think the hitch, however, is that given the liberal arts education in a nascent stage, awareness among parents and students about the job opportunities post the course is also a concern. And another concern, which as an academic, I feel is, do we have adequate number of faculties and institutions for liberal arts education in India? And I don't know, I mean, these are questions which we thought we could have addressed, but as a summary to our discussion, let's understand that liberal arts education is not intended to train one for a specific job, though it does prepare one for the world of work by providing them with invaluable set of employability skills, including the ability to think for themselves or skills to communicate effectively, and also the symbiotic capacity for lifelong learning. And a common trait of liberal arts education, which I believe, is that they are focused on the how part of education rather than the what part of education. And above everything, liberal arts education, as both the speakers were, kind of with several examples, we're trying to emphasize that it helps nurturing the qualities of being a responsible and confident citizens. Interestingly, colleges offering these courses in India have begun to kind of gain more ground, but for them to truly shine on the global map, they must be cognizant of the country's culture and the challenges of the times that we are currently in. So before we conclude, all what we wish to both the invited guest speakers, both Ms. Sagarika Ghose and Professor Dr. Anupam Das as May Your Tribe Increase. And as always, it has been a pleasure listening to both of you, both on screen as also off screen. I've been attending your sessions. We've been attending. Thank you very much for the wealth of time and the ideas that you've shared with us this morning. We really, really appreciate and is indebted to you for keeping us more informed, more refined through this 1 hour of, more than 1 hour, I think 1 hour, 40 minutes of interaction. Thank you, Christ University, especially the School of Commerce, Finance and Accountancy, for this online platform to learn from each other. Please also do help us by your likes, share, and subscribe this exclusive platform of learning. Once again, we thank you all, especially both the guest speakers, for enriching and engaging with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.